again for
You're
agreeing
welcome.
to join me tonight for our Legacy Conversations series or October. And so as I shared with you via email, that
Hmm.
this series, the goal of it is to really as it says in the name, to get the conversation started about legacy and to hopefully demystify and take away some of the angst and the fear that people have, especially our people have
Yes.
around the conversation of legacy or estate planning in general. Because I know
Hmm.
for me, I've said this multiple times when I growing up, I always thought of a trust or an estate as this, big mansion or whatever, somewhere, something on a hill behind a gate, and it was something that
Yes.
really, really wealthy people had, and it wasn't necessarily anything that was for me. And
Right.
as I've gotten older and I learned more, I definitely know it is for me. It is for all
Hmm.
of us. We all have a right to do it, and especially just with the understanding of an estate is, it's your property, and a plan is the way we make plans for everything else, we make plans for our life, for
Yes.
our estate. And so that's why I consider it legacy planning because it's not just about your stuff, it's
Hmm.
about who you are to people, what you want, how you want to live your life, and then how you want
Yes.
your loved ones to live after you have passed away.
Hmm.
So far in this series, we talked about like estate planning in general. And then
Yeah.
last month, we talked about wills and just kind of going into the different components of the will. And
Hmm.
so tonight, I want to talk about focus on trust. And I thank you, Marian, who also she is a CPA, and I'm going to let her tell you a little bit more about herself, but she's
Yes.
my CPA
Yes.
first and foremost. So like I said, talking about trust and just generally the role of a CPA, but also
Hmm.
how that plays a part in if you decide to have a trust or if you end up being the person who was appointed as a
Right.
trustee of a trust, because that's really where the work, that's really where you need to know what it is.
Right.
But I feel like I've been talking, so I'm gonna just say
That's
this. A
okay.
trust, I like to put it is there's the official term, but the way I like to break it down is a trust is you have a bucket, and I'm gonna take different things and put them
Hmm.
in my bucket. And so if this is
Yes.
the trust of Latavia Phillips, then I'm putting these assets or these things in this bucket. You could have just
Right.
one trust. You could have multiple trusts. So if you have multiple children, you could create a separate trust for each one. Some people, if they have the real estate investment, they might
Hmm.
put properties in trust. So I think that is the easiest way to break it down to me of just getting understanding of, hey, I have a bucket. I'm going to put things in that bucket,
Right.
and I want to then put somebody in charge of it to make sure they protect what's in the bucket, and
Yes.
also to make sure at minimum you maintain what I
What's in
put
the
in
bucket?
there, but
That's right.
hopefully you help grow the contents of that bucket.
Right.
And I have put instructions or rules around where that bucket goes, how it could be used, what goes in, what goes out, who has access to it. That's like
Right.
the easiest way to me to break down just at the core of what a trust is. But Marian, I'm gonna turn it over to you. If you could just tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you do,
Mhm.
and your experience with estate planning and trust as well.
Okay. Well, you'll see Marian Harvin, but I'm also known as Marian Okoye. That is my married name. I have been a CPA officially since 2015, but I have been an accountant for 15 years or so. Um, I,
Flying.
yes, it was. I've always had a passion for business. The reason why I went into accounting is because accounting is the language of business, fell in love with it, and decided to stick with it. I've had some iteration of an accounting business since starting in corporate, working with small businesses, helping them understand their numbers and explaining those numbers in a way that they can be empowered to make certain decisions. And if you find a CPA like a lawyer, you're pretty much going to stick with them from start to finish. So, my experience with like estates and trusts, specifically trusts, it's usually with the trustee.
Mhm.
That person, they generally have a lawyer that works with the trust itself, but it's the tax part of it becomes a little bit more complicated. And I like the analogy that you use as the bucket because they have the bucket and they're like, well, how does this bucket impact my taxes
Mhm. Right.
as a trustee, or can you file this trust return? And if we don't know everything that's in that bucket or the changes in the assets in that bucket, we have to go and talk to um, the folks that are in charge of that trust and say,
Mhm.
okay, what assets are here? What's going on here? And I'm not dealing with people that are, multimillionaires. There might be some property, like real estate property in there.
Mhm.
There might be some stock investments. You never know how much value you have. You're getting older. You might have a 401k. You might have all these things that you are now trying to figure out what to do with that's not separate from you. And
Mhm.
if, something happens, you can trust that it'll be there. And that's where the estate thing also comes into play as
Mhm.
well. Personally, as a Black woman, I will say, I'm not going to say all Black people, but at least in my family, there are a lot of what we do is reactionary, which is part of why I decided to go into accounting and go into business, is because when someone dies, it's like, where's everything going?
Mhm.
What, who has what? Where's the paperwork? And I work closely with lawyers and say, how do we go about doing this? Because
Right.
I'm not a lawyer, I'm a CPA. So I ask the lawyers those questions so that from a CPA standpoint, I can say, all right, this is how we go about doing this from a tax perspective. So that's a little bit about me.
No, well, thank you. And you're right. It is really, we are very much reactionary. And
Mm-hmm.
from things I've seen with my own family or friends going through things, it's okay. I don't want us to continue being reactionary. And like I said,
Yes.
just I think when my one of my grandmothers passed away, it was okay, there wasn't a lot of, she didn't necessarily own a lot of things, but it was still just a question of what do we do
Right.
with the things that were in her house? Like who,
Yeah.
even as simple as, not as simple, but the who gets what, or do we keep it? Where do
Right.
we, who gets these certain items? And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that people often think unless we have, these millions and all these properties, then there's no reason to make a plan. And it's like, no,
Yes.
if you're alive, you need to have a plan, even if
Please
it's
have a plan.
just about, if you get sick,
Yeah.
who do you want making those decisions for you? How do you want to be taken care of if something happens and you need someone to step in? And so that's a part of, I always say that's part of like the overall estate planning or life planning. But
Mm-hmm.
that's where, because oftentimes I get the question of, do I need a trust or a will? Like which one?
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
trusts are beneficial for certain things, but one of the benefits of a trust is that it helps you put in place what you want to happen while you're still alive in the
Yes.
event of incapacity.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, it's all in one document. It is a very large. It can be a very large document, and it is much
Yeah.
involved, but it's one document that talks about, this is how I want things to happen. This is who
Yeah.
I want to, I want Marian to be the one to make decisions for me. I want her to be
Mm-hmm.
able to open an account or pay my bills for me while I'm incapacitated. This is
Yes.
who or how I want it to be determined that I'm no longer in a position to make
Right.
these decisions for myself. And yes, there's other documents there's other ways to do that, but that's one of the things that is like, okay, great. um, Another benefit I would say of the trust is thinking about the bucket. If there is, and I feel like this is where I think it's a bit more common
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people. It is about, there's property. There may not be a lot of there may not be investments or things of that, but there's property, and this was a house that we want to keep in the family. And
Right.
so it was put in the trust, and we have these, whatever the parameters are about it. And so I tell people, even if it is just, hey, this is the house that you have and you want to make sure that your children have it,
Mm.
it might make more sense to put it in
Mm-hmm.
trust as opposed to leaving it in your will, because
Mm-hmm.
the will, it gives the instructions of what you want to happen after you pass.
Right.
But once you pass and ownership is transferred, it is theirs
It's
to
they can do
decide
whatever they want
what
to.
they want to do with it. And I
Right.
always think, like that first or second generation might remember what your wishes were, and they're going to do what they can to make sure. But as we get further and further away from you in your life, people might forget. or
Mm-hmm.
things get tough, or gentrification and development is
That's
real.
what exactly I was going to talk about. Because we're gonna, the people that are going to listen to this, I'm gonna say my people, the people that are in similar situations, because
Hmm.
I'll say I didn't come from money, but there is always a temptation to sell Big Mama's house.
Yes.
And if Big Mama's house is in a up and coming neighborhood, and y'all decide to sell for a couple $100,000, yes, you could pocket that money, but that house could now be multi-millions of dollars.
Hmm.
And having it in a trust, even if you decide that within the parameters of the trust you're able to sell it, but you have to come to some sort of agreement, you have that third party there. Like the trust itself then becomes not only just a document, but like a being, if you will, because it's
Hmm.
actually its own entity
Yes.
where you have to come together and make those decisions. And I just, I wish, I think it educating us on how that works and saying, all right, we all have to come together and say, are we going to sell Big Mama's house? Are we not going to sell Big Mama, or whatever you call your grandma, my dear, whoever? Um, your abuela, check in. If
Hmm.
you have that trust in place, that's that guide. And I also want to use that because it's a very big document. It's like writing your own story.
Yeah.
You write your own story when you're living your life. Those of us that are entrepreneurs, we're writing our own ticket.
Hmm.
And it's not always it, but we're writing it nonetheless,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. We're
um
holding
we're
on.
holding, we're holding on, right? And so as you're acquiring more assets and more things, you can start like adjusting that trust to say, all right, there's more things happening in my life. Or if you are an entrepreneur and it's based on you and only you, having that in place when you're incapacitated would be a lifesaver, because
Yes.
you can have those assets take care of you, or take care of your bills, and have a fiduciary or someone to take care of those bills on your behalf that's for you, like your CPA, like someone that is not your family that might try to take your money. Not saying that's everybody, but
Right. But it does happen.
it
Yeah.
happens, because, and I was thinking like, you go, some relative passes away, you go into the house and people are picking over things. They wouldn't be able to do that.
Exactly.
Can't pick over anything until we read what's in, like, not just the will, but what the trust says that we can
Hmm.
do. That's
Yeah.
very important.
No, it is because that's I'm just like I said, I'm thinking through some of like things with when one of my uncles passed. He didn't have any children. He didn't have a will, and I remember, I think I had just gotten out of law school, so I didn't know all the things, but I remember, oh wait, intestate succession, like he didn't have a
Mm-hmm.
will. The state has already decided, but I remember there was a cousin who was a lot really close, had a really good relationship, and so everyone was just like, oh no, well, she's gonna get this or it's gonna go to them. And I told my mom, like, no,
Right.
it's not. Everything is going to grandma because he wasn't married, he didn't have any children, he doesn't
Yes.
have a will. So the way
Mm-hmm.
that the laws are written, everything is, of course the state is gonna
They're
get
gonna
their
take their little
they're gonna
one
get
or
their
ten
hand
percent.
they're gonna get
Mm-hmm.
their portion.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think he worked for the state. And
Okay.
so he had a pension. So, but it's like whatever he, would have gone to family or any of his assets, all of that stuff is going to go to grandma. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember mom saying, huh? And I'm like, I don't know exactly how it works yet, but and so I remember that was one of the things was like, okay, yes, I had an interest in it.
Yeah.
And when I was seeing what was happening with my family, it's like, okay, I want to learn more about this. If for nothing else, I can help my family, but
Yes.
also help other people. And speaking of the trust, and you're talking about the state getting their hands in, I guess if you could talk a little bit about the tax implications of
Mm-hmm.
planning, because I think social media and the media, it's always you want to avoid probate and taxes because the taxes are so much, and we know that the taxes that people talk about don't apply to everybody equally. But if you could, because I saw a video earlier this week where somebody was talking about the fact that you shouldn't, like, don't leave the house to me, dad, because then the step up basis, and then if I sell it, then I gotta pay the gains. And I'm like, you're saying the right
Oh, yes.
words, but
But
you're
it's
not
not.
giving the right context. So yes, please.
Whew, all right. So, where do I begin? Um, so the big thing with like the estate, we'll talk about the estate taxes first. There's usually like a really, really high amount that's excluded from being subjected to taxes. I want to say like millions, 13 million or something like that. Um, and then there's also some exclusions that come with spousal inheritance and some exclusions that come with direct descendant
Yep.
inheritance. Um, and then if there's taxes, like after all that, after we consider, all that, the tax might be in Maryland is 1%.
Hmm.
So that's a fraction of what that is. Regarding like the step up basis and the taxes that you would have to pay on that, capital gains tax is its own thing, but it's not as scary as the taxes you pay on your W-2. So, um, capital gains tax is usually capped at 20%, because it's long-term capital gains. So it's capped at 20% if you make a certain amount of money. So if you're inheriting a certain amount of money after they do like a modified adjustment to income, you're at max going to pay 20% on that of what's taxable.
Right.
So that's after all of that, that's what you pay your taxes on. Most people fall within the 0 to 15% range because there is a point where you pay zero capital gains tax on long term, capital
Hmm.
gains. So that's something that I don't like to like. It's not easily digestible
Right.
posting it on social media because
Hmm.
it's like it's not a gotcha. Um, it's something that's complicated. And I wish that people would use case studies to say, all right, this is this scenario, and this
Hmm.
is what that would result in. Because I do think that it will be a lot clearer for folks to get, okay, I know that my mama has this much. This case is more relatable to me
Right.
than, don't leave my house. Don't leave the house to me. Leave the house so you can do that.
Yeah,
I
because
still think putting in a trust is
parent.
better, but
Yeah, it's
yeah,
your child, so you're exempt from a lot of it.
yeah,
Yeah,
you're good. You're fine. You're fine.
that
And
doesn't apply to you. And
it doesn't.
unless the estate is in the like the 5 to 10 million value,
Mm-hmm.
this doesn't apply to you
It
anyway.
really doesn't.
And
Not at all.
for the vast majority of us,
Yes.
it's not applicable to us.
Not at all.
I'm happy that you broke that down because, like I said, I get very frustrated. And I
Mm-hmm.
talked about this before of the whole, even the thing of, I got an escort. No, you don't. That's not, it's not an entity type. You don't have,
Yes.
you don't. You don't. Just no, you do not. You do not. You have a corporation, you have an
Mm-hmm.
LLC, you have a partnership, you are a
Yes.
sole proprietor.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You might get, but that's a whole nother tangent.
I can rant about that.
And also with tax implications, but
Yes.
so I guess just trying to I guess thinking about, let's say if it's someone that they've decided that they want to create the trust,
Mm-hmm.
and we're now time to fund the trust because that's also a
Yeah.
big thing that I have to make sure people understand. You can create it, you could write your story,
Mm-hmm.
all the details and instructions,
Right.
but if you don't actually put anything in the bucket,
Right.
it's essentially useless. It was
Yeah.
a contract that never went anywhere. But I guess for people, if you're like, hey, I'm even thinking of if it's the house that I want to
Mm-hmm.
put in a trust, or if it's, the investment account, retirement accounts that they're once
Yeah.
they're in the trust. Because if you could talk about some of the tax components
Implications of
of
that.
that, especially if the person is creating, and I didn't say this at the beginning, but you could have a revocable or
Yes.
irrevocable trust.
Right.
The revocable trust is when you're creating, you can revoke it, you can cancel it at any point while you're alive, you can make changes to it.
Right.
And typically when you do a revocable trust, the person creating it, you appoint yourself as the trustee.
Right.
Whereas irrevocable, once you make it, that's what it is. There's no
Mm-hmm.
changing it. So I guess speaking more on the revocable side, what
Yeah.
those tax considerations are of people putting things in the trust and how that works while they're still alive.
So, like, putting things in the trust, a revocable trust especially, you're now putting something into another entity. Even though
Mhm.
you're appointed, you're putting something into another entity that doesn't protect you from taxes necessarily because you're still active. Things are still growing in that trust. So if you have some unrealized gains in there, they will act like unrealized gains, which aren't taxable because they haven't been realized. If there's some movement of like actual activity that would be taxable, there's some things you would have to consider. So if you're
Mhm.
selling, buying stocks and things of that nature, the best thing to do would be to um, consider it like an extension of yourself
Okay.
because you can always revoke it. You can always say, all right, this is dissolved and now I'm taking whatever the assets are that have appreciated. If you have a taxable event in the trust, that's something that you would have to consider as like you might have to pay taxes on it. Like it's not a
Right.
place where you can say this is my tax shelter because it's not
Mhm.
a tax shelter. It's its own entity. It has its own tax return, but it is subjected to certain taxes. So capital gains, things that are specific to that, there's some benefit there. So let's say the revocable trust, I like to use numbers, I love numbers.
Yeah.
So let's say that, you have $100,000 worth of something in that trust
Mhm.
and you can realize the capital gains of like $20,000. Let's say that is its own entity. So that entity will be subjected to whatever the capital gains tax is on that. So it might be like 20% depending on the other items that are in there.
Mhm.
But and so there might be a benefit to you because you might be a person that makes significantly more than that. So
Mhm.
your capital gains tax might be a lot higher because of your income bracket. So there is some benefit, but I do think people need to understand that it's not like a place that you can just hide money and not pay
Right.
taxes on it if there's activity that happens in there that's taxable.
Right. No, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's because the revocable trust, especially if it's like if I create a trust, the
Mm-hmm.
trust has my social security number. It is
Yep.
not a new one. You don't unsign so if I use myself, I've created a trust. It has, for tax purposes, it has my social security number. When
Oh
I
yeah.
pass away and then it becomes irrevocable,
Right.
then the trustee would need to apply for an EIN for that
Mm-hmm.
trust. And then it
Exactly.
is a completely separate
Completely separate
entity.
entity. You still get a K1. So that's something that um for the S corp people. when your when your entity reports income, that's like for it goes down to you because you are the person that's running that's the appointed beneficiary of that trust. So there are activities that happen in there that you should still talk to your tax advisor about. Like, hey, I'm doing this. Things are happening here.
Mhm.
What's the impact of that? Those are things that you should still talk about. So thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, you're still subjected to those things.
And these are the things that it's like I'm happy we're having the conversation, and I really
Mm-hmm.
hope people listen and then get the benefit of it. Of just I do, like I said, I don't want anybody to walk away thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't do a trust, or maybe, it's like it is a tool and it's
Yes.
beneficial. But I always tell
Mm-hmm.
you people, like, really think about what are your goals.
Yeah.
Anytime I'm having a consultation or talking to anyone about estate planning, it's like, before I mention, let's do a will-based plan, let's do this. What are your goals?
Mm-hmm.
What are the assets that you have? What are you trying to do? How do you want to live? What do you want to have happen when you pass away?
Yeah.
Also, where are you currently financially? Because creating a trust is a, is a bigger investment
Yes, it
than
is.
a will, um,
Mm-hmm.
because you are essentially sitting down and how can I plan my life and things
Yes.
after I
Yeah.
pass, and you have to take so many things into consideration, especially if you are married, if you even if
Mm-hmm.
you're not married, if you have children, if you have other family members or friends that you take care of, if you have someone in your life who maybe has some special needs, or that you need
Yeah.
to provide for, and make sure that there are people in place to be able to care for and provide for them at a standard of care that you would. If you
Exactly.
have a blended family, you got to think about all of those things, and depending on what your goals are or what your needs are, then it's okay, based on what you're saying, hey, a will would be better right now. Or, like, as you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, if you're at this, like, hey, at this season of my life, a
Mm-hmm.
will suffice.
Right.
But as things progress and we grow and expand, okay, you know what? Let's revisit it.
Come
I'm
back
not
in
going to
here.
put the trust in place, or you can also, one thing I didn't mention too, you can also do what's called a testamentary trust, where
Ooh.
you have language in your will.
Mm.
Essentially, you put the instructions on how of, hey, when I pass away, I want a trust to be created, and this is how I want the trust to be set up. This is who I want to be the trustee, and this is what I want to have happen. And
Learn
so
something new.
it's not as much control in terms of while you're alive,
Yeah.
but it still gives you, it's essentially you're setting aside or identifying what the bucket is you want after you pass away. So if it's to say, when I pass away, I want my house, I want a trust created for my house.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I want, this is who I want to be the trustee. This is what I want. Or I want, create a trust for my children and so there's other ways that you can do it. And so those
Yeah.
are things that it's important to, they have a conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what do I want? Even the conversation of, or the question of, do you want to be buried or cremated? Or
Yeah.
do you want to be an organ donor?
Yeah.
Want, there's something, I think they still do it, like you can have your body composted and then be planted as a tree.
That's what I want.
Do you want, it's also for people who are veterans, do you want a military funeral? Do you want to be
Yeah.
buried in a national cemetery? Like cemetery, those are things that those require advanced planning. And then once you
Yeah.
have that conversation with yourself, then go have it with somebody else so they know what your
Seriously.
plans are. And then start,
Yeah.
call one of us, talk to us
Great. Cool.
about about your plan, and
I
to
do
help
have
us.
a question about the testimony or the test. Is it testimony will?
The
Is that what it's called?
testamentary trust. Hmm.
Testamentary trust. I'm learning something new about that. So I'm gonna ask you, is that something that you can also put in place if you are, and you in the audience, if you are incapacitated, or would it be best to just do like a different type of trust?
Oh, you mean like, could you put in instructions of
Mm-hmm.
so no, that would need to be in a trust you create now, like a trust
That's
you
good to
create
know.
while you're alive, because
Yes.
the will doesn't go into effect until you
Until you
pass
pass.
away. So even if there are instructions in there, it
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be beneficial.
Exactly.
So another thing that you could do to address that is there is the advanced medical directive.
Right.
In Maryland, it's called an advanced medical directive. Some states refer to it as a healthcare power of attorney.
Mm-hmm.
So though that is a document that I say, regardless,
Yes.
married, single, have children, whatever, we should, as soon as you turn 18, that is something you
Yes.
should have. Because then you can designate who you want to be your healthcare agent. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can, I think all states have some type of statutory form. I'll use Maryland as an example. You can say, hey, you can do it in two or three parts. One, I just want to identify or designate my healthcare agent. This is who I
Right.
want them to be, or any alternates. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can go on to say, in various end stage conditions, this is what I want. I want to
Yeah.
be, I want you to do any and everything you can to keep me alive.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to not, or just keep me comfortable. And it
Right.
goes through three specific scenarios that you can answer questions to. You can also identify, I want my healthcare agent to make these decisions on their own, or I want them to
Mm-hmm.
do it in consultation with the physician,
Yeah.
or I want, before they make a decision, I want them to talk to ABCD. So you can, even with that, you can go into detail about what you want to happen in the event that you are incapacitated, whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
temporary or a permanent thing.
Yeah.
And it also, you can talk about whether you want to be an organ donor, or whether you want them to be able to experiment, or so there are other things or other options that if you're
Yeah.
not, that you want to do a trust,
Mm-hmm.
you can do that. And so whenever I'm doing an estate plan, um, so if someone says they want a will, then we're going to talk about a power of attorney and an
Yeah.
advanced medical directive as well, because
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure we're thinking about everything. Um,
Yeah.
and so that would be a way to
I like
address.
how accessible this conversation is because as I'm thinking, I'm like thinking through, I like scenarios. So I'm thinking through how a person will progress through their life.
Mhm.
And let's say, business owners, you start off something small and you might be thinking more, okay, I'm going to put the will, the advanced directive in place, and then kind of building. It sounds like you can build on that. So you're saying I
Yeah.
can shift what I'm putting in here into a trust. Maybe you make it a revocable trust at first and then determine like, okay, is there a step to go from revocable to irrevocable outside of death?
It's no, you would not necessarily, you might need to
Mhm.
just create another, you would essentially create a new one, but you
Yeah,
could use the same information.
gotcha.
But it's definitely, and I even say with the documents, it's not a set it and forget it.
Right.
But like you
Mhm.
said, we progress, things change. I always tell
Mhm.
people when you're thinking about your estate planning documents, attributed or I liken it to when you have a job and there's annual enrollment, or they say anytime
Mhm.
there's a major life event or each year you're eligible to make changes. So each
Yes.
year or every time you have some major life event, pull that stuff out.
Mhm.
Let me see, does this still align with what
Right.
I want and need? Have my goals changed? Have my desires changed? Like I had someone call me not too long ago, and for whatever reason, they no
Mhm.
longer want their husband. They want to leave everything to their child, and they don't
Okay.
want to leave their husband. They don't want their
Mhm.
husband to have. And they were talking about property, and because
Mhm.
they're a blended family. So, well,
Mhm.
is your spouse's name on the
Yeah.
deed? Yes. Okay, well, are they willing to sign over their ownership? No, I don't think so. Well, then you can only leave your interest to,
Right.
you can only transfer or pass on, whether it be in a trust or a will, you can
Mhm.
only convey or give someone what you own. So
Exactly.
in that case, I was like, hey, with terms of this property, if
Mhm.
you want to give yours to your son and he wants to give his to his daughter, you
Mhm.
all can do that, but it's going to be that your children are going to end up owning this together.
Basically,
It's
yeah.
going to be on them to decide what to do. But your other accounts, if you have, life insurance, so things where there's a beneficiary, start
Mhm.
make sure you get those updated and change that. So it's even those
Yes.
things to think about because life change, things change, people
Mhm.
change. Um, so those are things, like I said, don't set it and forget it. Make sure
Yeah.
you are reviewing it. And once you have a plan and you've done this, you spend all this time and made this
Mhm.
investment, make sure you tell people that you did it and where they can find it.
Yes.
Somebody, and if you list somebody as a healthcare agent, as your power of attorney, as your executor or personal representative, trustee, make sure they know
Yeah. Please
that
make
they
sure they
don't
know.
find out when you pass away or when something
Yeah.
happens. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, but
There should be a checklist. I will say, just to add a little bit to that, I tell people check in, as a CPA from this, like check in, anything happen, anything crazy happen this quarter, this part of the year. Um, I think it will be like having that idea of like annual enrollment every year, maybe on the anniversary when you do your trust, say, let's look and see what's happening. Or if there are major life changes, if you keep a journal, go ahead and go to that trust and see what's going on, see if anything is impacted by that. I know we don't like to talk about or think about, bad things happening, but having that in place will make it feel a little less bad.
I agree
Hmm.
wholeheartedly. I also feel like we could keep going.
I know, I know, I know.
I have more questions, but I appreciate it. I want to be respectful of time.
Mhm.
So if you are available or willing, would you come back and we can
Yes,
finish
I'll
this
come back.
next month?
I will come back. I like this. I like this a lot. I
So,
might have to have you on my little show that I'm going to start eventually called Beyond the Numbers.
oh, I like it.
Uh,
It is not a little
yes.
show.
You're right.
It's
My
not a little,
show.
it is not a
Yes.
little show. Yes. No,
Thank
I
you.
would be happy to, but thank you
Yes. Thank you so
so
much.
much for this and for
Yes.
having the conversation with me.
Yes.
If you could tell people how they can find you, if they would like to, if you need a CPA, especially in general, you do, but especially if you're an entrepreneur, you need one.
Yes. Yes. It's not that bad. Trust me, it's more expensive not to have one than to have one. So,
That part, that's a
yes.
whole other conversation. Just
Come on now. We
spend the
can put
money.
that on.
Yes, spend
Yes.
the money and get a good foundation up front so
Please.
that because you
Please.
will end up spending more trying to correct the stuff that you
Facts.
thought you could do on your own.
Come on. Come on. Even just look at their, if they have like myself, they have things and tools that you can read that won't take you hours to understand because it's said in very plain language, then maybe go to them, book an hour of their time, buy their tools. Speaking of that, my website is www.nirvanaconsulting.co. And yeah, if you just go to my website, peruse around, inquire, you can also shoot me a message at Marian at nirvanaconsulting.co.
Well, thank you. Yes, and it is very her website is very user friendly. There are a lot of
Yes.
resources on there. I have
Yes.
spent some time there myself. But I think which I need to schedule something myself. I need to check in. But yeah, so thank you all for listening. I'm Latavia, LA Legal Solutions. Website is www.lalegalsolutions, and that's solutions with a Z.com.
Mm-hmm.
Email me at info at lalegalsolutions.com. On social media, it's also LA Legal Solutions. So thank you all. Definitely make sure you come back next month,
Please.
a continuation of this conversation. If you have any
Mm-hmm.
questions, let us know so we can address them. But thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.